All right, well, welcome to session 4, folks. Making conservation a way of life, conservation, calculation, activation, and some frustration. In 2018, the California Legislature overhauled California's approach to conserving water. It imposed a number of requirements on state water agencies and local water retail agencies, and provided for significantly greater state oversight in local water use, even in non-drought years. One of the outcomes requires the State Water Resources Control Board to establish long-term urban water use efficiency standards, which will include components for indoor residential use, outdoor residential use, water losses, and other uses. The new laws also set a standard of 55 gallons per person per day through January 1st, 2025. In addition, the state will require local water suppliers to calculate and comply with their water use objectives and report those objectives and actual use. 5-year drought risk assessments and water shortage contingency plans must also be incorporated into local urban water management plans. Starting in 2027, local water agencies' failure to comply with adopted long-term standards could result in significant fines during declared drought emergencies and during certain dry years. In this session, we're going to learn how the state is trying to make conservation a way of life and how local Orange County water agencies are coping with these changes. Is there a downside to conservation, like hidden costs? Today, these speakers include Max Gomberg, Conservation and Climate Change Manager for the State Water Resources Control Board, who was instrumental in crafting the state plan and is now tasked with rolling it out. And Paul Shoenberger, General Manager of Mesa Water District, and Daniel Ferons, General Manager of Santa Margarita Water District, 2 general managers who will have to implement the plan and convince their customers to make more conservation a way of life. I say more because Orange County implemented voluntary water efficiency measures for more than a decade, much longer than other parts of the state. As with the previous sessions, each of the speakers will present, and then we'll have some questions. Please consult their bios. You'll be tested later. Please welcome these gentlemen to the stage. Gents? Pleasure to meet you. Nice to see you. Thanks, gents. All righty. Max, we're going to start with you.
So I left my Darth Vader mask at home. But let me just say, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Okay, so we're talking conservation, and you see on my first slide here that the first thing up there is housing. Why? Well, first off, housing is a critical issue. It's getting a ton of attention up at the state capitol right now. As many of you, I'm sure, well aware, the state faces a severe housing affordability challenge. We have a need to build much more housing than is being built to accommodate our growing population, to make housing affordable for all of our residents. And so the focus, despite certain bills not advancing this year, is on creating more density. And it's really shifting the model that was in place throughout the 20th century of suburban single-family house development, which is prevalent in large parts of Orange County and elsewhere around the state, back to an urban-focused, high-density model of housing. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it has implications for water conservation and water use profiles for the state. The other issue, of course, is affordability. Housing affordability is huge, whether it's for purchasing a house or whether it's for renting, and it's one of the biggest drivers of economic instability in our state while our economy is still very strong. So that plays into these discussions around water rates and affordability as well. Second thing there is transportation and land use, because we're also seeing shifts in these areas that ultimately play into this discussion about urban water use and these standards. We're shifting towards, away from cars, gasoline-powered cars, and towards more mass transit. It doesn't mean the high-speed rail will be built anytime soon or solve all of our problems, but there is a larger sense that we need more investments in transit options that carry more than just one person or a single family. As you know very well, we can't build more freeways out of this, to get ourselves out of this issue. Adding more lanes to the 5 or the 405 or the 91 isn't going to solve the problem. We need to fundamentally shift away from single passenger vehicles as our dominant mode of transportation. And then also, we're seeing shifts in land use. And a lot of the agencies in the room have participated and been leaders in this area of shifting away from gray infrastructure that shunts all that contaminated water straight out to the ocean to green infrastructure, which helps it infiltrate into groundwater where it exists, helps reduce urban heat island, many other multiple benefits. So these are some of the large-scale shifts that, again, impact how urban conservation will play out in the years and decades ahead. And then the third thing I want to note, and other speakers have mentioned the impacts of climate change, but we're really beginning to see this more full-scale in the state. We've seen it over the past decade, shifting from drought to high water, high precipitation years. Luckily, we haven't had the type of flooding that they're experiencing in parts of the Midwest and the South right now, but it will come. And then, of course, fire season is now year-round, and we have one of our major electric utilities essentially in bankruptcy due to fires. And so all of these things are putting tremendous pressure on the state overall to change the way that we do business. And the one takeaway I want to leave you with on this is about investment. Fundamentally, we need to make major investments in our infrastructure, in resiliency of our communities. That's a big focus of the governor's executive order. If we don't do that soon, we're going to break the bank on disaster response. Okay, so shifting to the legislation itself and what's in it, how does this roll out? So there are three components, as was mentioned. There's an indoor component, an outdoor component, and a loss component. There are also other things that factor into the ultimate annual water budget, variances, and bonus for recycled water, which many of you in this room will be able to take advantage of for your agencies. That all rolls into an annual objective, and that's what we will be measuring compliance based on. I'm going the wrong way. Whoop, there we go. Okay, so the indoor standard. Out of the three, it's the one that currently is fixed and is uniform across the state. And you see it does drop over time. One of the things that the legislation included, however, is that bottom bullet, which is that we need to take a look at whether this is really the right approach and whether this is really the right number. So we're working with our colleagues at the Department of Water Resources on assessing that. I will tell you my assessment at this point in time is that 55 is probably too high for a statewide number. We probably need to come down. Many regions around the state are already well below that based on the data we have. I think what may be more reasonable, and again, I don't want to say this is necessarily going to make it into our recommendations, but probably a lower standard along with a variance process for certain areas around the state where it really does make sense to be higher. Outdoor standards. So this one is tailored to specific conditions within each water supplier in the state. And it includes the residential landscapes and the non-residential landscapes that have dedicated irrigation meters. The key issues that remain to be worked out here are essentially these. How accurate is accurate enough? There is no such thing as 100% accuracy, even with the advancements in aerial imaging technology. So what are we aiming for? What is really the definition of irrigable landscape, especially when you're talking about larger suburban parcels that back up into, say, hills or other natural areas. And then, of course, this evapotranspiration factor, this ETO factor, which currently, per state regulation, is set at 0.8 for existing development, excluding special landscapes like parks, and 0.55 for new development. What do those numbers mean? Well, what they mean is how much green turf grass you could keep green during the hot summer months based on that efficiency factor. So essentially you can think of a 0.8 is, well, you could have 80% of your landscape as grass, and that's the water budget. So again, 0.55 is what our standard is for new developments. We're going to have to pick and choose as part of this regulatory process to try to define what is efficient outdoor use. Water loss. This is really about infrastructure, investing in infrastructure, maintaining our infrastructure. We know what the consequences are all too well of when we do not invest in and maintain our infrastructure. We had to evacuate 200,000 people below Oroville Dam just a couple years ago because of lack of investment in infrastructure on the state's part. So the water loss standard here is looking at that highly valuable water that you put into your distribution system because you put chemicals into it, you're pressurizing it, there's energy associated with it, and making sure that the level of losses really reflects the economic value of that water. We wrote legislation on this back in 2015, and we're now at the implementation stage. So we've got a workshop next Friday up in Sacramento to discuss our economic model, which will be out early next week. And then we move into the regulatory phase and hope to have standards adopted for water loss by the middle of next year. Variances. So the legislation does list out certain types of water uses or conditions that may be subject to a variance. For example, seasonal populations or large animals, evaporative coolers, there's a list. What we're going to look at in terms of whether any system gets a variance here is thresholds. How much of the total water is really tied up in this variance or this special condition, and does it really make sense? So that's the variance process. I'm moving through quickly here so I don't get bazinged. Okay, this one I know is important to everyone in this room, the bonus incentive. So the bonus incentive is you got your budget, but if you've got indirect potable reuse water, you get a bonus on top of your budget that keeps my compliance and enforcement people off your back. So the key thing to note here is this is for indirect potable. So what you do here in Orange County, putting it in the ground, or what they're now doing in San Diego, putting it in a surface water reservoir. This does not include the purple pipe systems, and I know the other two panelists here are going to touch on that. But you can see what the percentages are also on this slide. Okay, so how are we going to look at this? Because we have to set these standards. We have to do a CEQA process because there's always environmental review associated with these major regulations, and we have to do an economic impact assessment statewide as well. We have to factor in a lot of different moving parts here, and you see some of them listed here. The key thing we have to factor in is the uncertain future. We know that all the models show that our future is more extremes, more wet, more extreme dry, less in that middle zone that the state experienced mostly in the last century. So when we're looking at impacts of this over the compliance period of 2023 through 2027, it matters a lot whether we have 5 dry years or whether we have 5 wetter years. So we have to model that, and we've got work going on to do that right now, and we'll be sharing that in the months ahead. Compliance. So the legislation sets out a very specific timeline for compliance and when we can issue certain types of orders. This is very different than it was during the emergency period, during the drought. It is very specified. We don't get to orders where we say if you're not doing enough, we actually tell you to do things until post-2025. If it comes to that, and I highly doubt it will, particularly for Orange County, because bazinga, you've got a recycled water credit. There would be no fines until 2027 under this framework. So again, it's progressive how it rolls out. We'll be looking annually at all of the data that comes in, but I'm not particularly worried at this point that we're going to have compliance issues. I really think this is something that all of the systems and agencies should be able to meet these standards. The other thing I'll note on compliance, for those of you who follow the legislative year, Senator Hertzberg has a bill, SB 134, that addresses the issue that was identified last year on double jeopardy, in that we can enforce for the water loss standard independent of the other two pieces of the conservation standard. His bill would essentially say we look at the water loss compliance first. If we're in a compliance process on water loss, then we won't come after you for indoor and outdoor. Okay, in my 50 seconds left. The main point I want to make here is that the way this legislation is structured, it really does preserve the subsidiarity concept. There is a lot of flexibility for all of you to meet these standards in terms of where you put emphasis on your conservation programs and where you put budget and personnel emphasis. And that's true both for the standards themselves as well as for the drought planning component of this. So to sum it all up, we've got a lot of challenges ahead of us, from the emerging water quality contaminants that were discussed earlier, to our infrastructure needs, to everything else. It's going to take a lot of money. We need to figure out how to raise it from all available sources, and I hope we can have a constructive dialogue about all the regulatory pieces of this, because the regulation's not going away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. Paul Shoenberger.
Thank you very much. I would like to start off my talk with a quick literary reading. And it goes like this. There would be wet and wonderful years when the land would shout with grass, and then the dry years would come. The land dried and cracked, and the farmers would be filled with disgust. And it never failed that during the dry years, the people forgot about the rich years. And during the wet years, they lost all memory of the dry years. So that was written in 1952 by John Steinbeck in his book, East of Eden. And I think it kind of shows what this conference is talking about, how the water industry needs to average out all those wet years and all those dry years to make sure that in all years, California has water for our quality of life. So these are the items I'm going to be, that I'm going to be covering in my talk. Mostly how Mesa Water has dealt with these during the most recent drought and what our ideas are going forward. And probably one of the most important of them is water use efficiency. And in previous droughts, we've always talked about conservation. Conservation, indoor conservation, outdoor conservation. But we have changed our vernacular towards water use efficiency. Conservation is a great word, makes you feel good. The more you conserve, the better. Water use efficiency has embraced the human right to water. We need water. We need water for ourselves. We need water for our booming economy. We need water for our quality of life. So we have changed our discussions in Mesa Water from water conservation to water use efficiency. We have also changed from indoor and outdoor to a focus primarily on the outdoor. And maybe that's unique to the Orange County Water District area. But once Orange County Water District builds their final version of the groundwater replenishment system, we'll be recycling almost all the wastewater that is developed in this area. And where does wastewater come from? Indoor water use. So we are soon going to be hitting a time when additional indoor water conservation is starving our recycled water system. So that's not, your highest bang for the buck. So we feel that our highest bang for the buck is to really concentrate on the outdoor conservation going forward. And also, as Max pointed, that water loss prevention is very, very important. In the last drought, Mesa Water, we started a pipeline integrity program. And that pipeline integrity program tests all of our pipe to see what is the next segment of pipe we need to replace, how much useful life is there left in every segment of pipe that we have. It helped us keep our system tight, well-maintained, at the lowest cost possible. Mesa Water, we have a 2.9% water loss, which is pretty low. A lot of agencies here have that. Here's a thought though. When is that water dripping out of your pipe lost, and when is it groundwater recharge? Because the state has said groundwater recharge is a beneficial use. And it might be, depending on where you're at. Where Mesa Water is, it's probably lost. It's probably lost to the system and won't be used again. In Anaheim here though, maybe we're just transferring water from the pipe into storage. So that's something that needs to be resolved and will be up at the state level, I think, very soon. In all of our recent droughts, Mesa Water has relied heavily on voluntary compliance. And we have avoided penalties and fines. We've avoided penalty rates. You know, the heavy hand of government coming in and telling the citizens, you must do this or we're going to come down on you. And that puts a lot of burden on us to outreach to them so that they know the situation and they are compelled to act. So in this last drought, we spent, in addition to losing a lot of revenue due to less water sales, we spent a lot of money in really amping up our water conservation. And I've got a list of some of the things that we did here, which included, we had the suggested watering days, we did mailers, letters, postcards, door hangers, bus ads, billboards, trailers in the movie theaters, town hall meetings. Really amped it up along with all the state media and the Caltrans freeway signs. People got the message and they really performed. So one interesting thing I think for all the water districts is, who are your top users? In Mesa Water, 5% of our users use 50% of the water. So during the last drought, they got special attention from us. We sent them monthly emails, monthly letters, and we gave them phone calls to make sure that they were engaged and that they knew what to do and they were following up. So the other side of the coin from conservation and water use efficiency is supply reliability. The governor's new executive order talks about supply resiliency. And the GWRS and Mesa Water's Mesa Water Reliability Facility are two of those types of projects that are helping round out the picture of providing this quality of life for everybody. And our board has pretty much a policy to support projects in the county here, regional projects that are going to improve our supply reliability. So if you have a groundwater cleanup project, a desalination project, a recycling or water conservation project, and you need a letter of support, give us a call. We'll send you a letter of support. And then I want to talk about financial stability. How do you, in a 1,000-year drought, when you're reducing your revenue by 20 to 36%, increasing your cost, maintain financial stability? And why does Shoenberger have this picture of a reservoir instead of maybe a bag of money or something up there, right? So I'm trying to make an analogy for what we're familiar with, water supply reliability and financial stability. Because it's not the stream that you draw from that gives you the stability. for water supply. It's that reservoir of 2, 3, 4 years of water that gives you that reliability. And so similarly on the financial side, it's not your monthly revenue coming in, it's not how your rates are structured or the level of your rates. It's that reservoir of cash on hand that you have that gives you that financial stability. So our board set a very high level of financial strength that we kind of built up over 7 years. During the drought, we had to draw into that, and then now we're building that back up. And it helped us avoid telling our customers, thank you for conserving, your reward is rate hikes. And it helped them not have to say, thank you for the rate hikes, your reward is a new board of directors. Every agency should be talking about how much they have in reserves. So going forward, I just want to end with a historical quote, or not a quote, but a historical story. It is thought that Father Junipero Serra, the founder of our California mission systems, at one point thought, how are we going to get enough water for 21 missions? But we did get the water. There's plenty of water for 21 missions. They bloomed, and then all of California bloomed. And then instead of serving 21 missions, we're serving 21 million people, and soon we're going to be serving 41 million people. So the water industry, especially here in Orange County, together has always met all of those challenges. We have since Father Junipero Serra's time, we have since John Steinbeck's time, and I'm confident together we'll be able to meet these challenges going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dan?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. We've had history with Phil and Michael this morning. We had science. Now we had literary. So I guess now you're going to get a little engineering. But before that, I think we ought to take it, particularly from Phil and Michael on the history, and look at whether or not we should join together with the 150 years of water use efficiency that's been discussed in the state. So I think we should propose some changes. I think Max should be the Water Conservation and Climate Change Zanjero. Paul and I, General Janeros, and Fritz, the Weather Zanjero. So that we are all working together with similar titles, similar approaches to manage this water system that we've got going in the state here. Santa Margarita, for those who don't know, southeast corner of Orange County. We're a growing area. We have 165,000 residents. We got about 30,000 more to go. 55,000 connections, treatment plants, lots of miles of pipeline, lots of opportunity for water loss. And so lots of opportunity for water efficiency. Our water portfolio is a little different than what you just heard about. We don't have groundwater. We have impaired groundwater in our area. So we have 75% right now drinking water that's imported. 25% is urban runoff and recycled water. We've been collecting urban runoff for reuse since the 70s. We have future plans to reduce that imported water to 50% and have 20% local supply. Direct potable reuse is one of the opportunities we're looking at, and enhancing the groundwater basin is another one, and increasing our recycled water to 30%. During the last drought, start of the last drought, we were at 27,000 acre feet of drinking water. We're currently at 22. We achieved our targets, and we haven't seen it come back yet. And that is the approach that we took, was looking for those permanent changes, getting people to change their behavior, not just reduce their water use for a temporary basis. We also took the outreach approach, no penalties. We brought in 3 water use efficiency staff people. We created a landscape design studio. We built and created landscape in a box so that people could come in, pick out what they want, and have it delivered to their house. We implemented a water budget billing structure in 2015. We had tiered rates before that, but we have gone out and done the work to measure all the irrigable acres and figure out each and every parcel how much water they should be using. And we expanded the recycled water system, which accounted for 30% of our savings by converting people from domestic water irrigation over to recycled water irrigation. This effort was multi-million-dollar. I mean, how many industries do you know that spend multi-millions of dollars to convince people not to use their product? And that's what the state was faced with. That's the approach that we all had to take, going out trying to figure out what's the best way to approach this. I'm going to emphasize that strategic investment in recycled water because the new ordinances that we're talking about now have fundamentally changed some of the approaches that we've used historically as an industry. So during the last drought, we put $10.5 million capital investment into converting 100+ irrigation sites from domestic water over to recycled water. And we also converted Lake Mission Viejo, so it's the first swimmable recycled water lake in the nation that we know of. That accounted for 750 acre-feet of savings in perpetuity of domestic water. It's all on recycled water now. This graph shows that conversion from 2013 over to 2018. You could see the increase in recycled water accounts and the decrease in domestic irrigation accounts. You could see the difference in the water demands and how we were working this out. And then this is permanent potable water savings. The emphasis in the past has been on that potable water system and saving that water, making it available for other folks to use, because in a lot of areas of the state, recycled water isn't being made. It's secondary effluent that goes out to the ocean now. And in South Orange County and in Orange County, we've invested a lot of money in recycled water and use of recycled water, and it frees up domestic water for the growth that's coming or for other areas to use during the droughts. We want to continue that investment in recycled water. The way our district was formed, the community of Rancho Santa Margarita and Las Flores, when they were built, the regional board, because of the way the basin plan was written, didn't allow us to put in recycled water. And we've worked with them for a number of years to get that basin plan changed, so now we can go back in and retrofit that area with recycled water. But we currently meet the new conservation legislation. So if we're going to invest $40 million, we're going to convince the residents there that they should tax themselves $120 a year to convert their system to recycle water. We're just going to substitute water and not get a credit for it. It's an effort that in the past we had the opportunity under SB 7x7, the so-called 20% by 2020 reduction. You weren't accounting for your recycled water. During the recent drought with the mandated reporting, you weren't accounting for your recycled water. And in those cases, we use that as a great marketing tool for these communities to be able to go to them and say, here's an opportunity for you to invest in recycled water, and it helps you drought-proof your area, because recycled water is inherently drought-proof. We already know the supply. We know how much we get every day. It's gone down a little bit because of people efficiency, but we still know how much we get. It's water use efficiency because we don't allow runoff when you use recycled water. We inspect the sites. We don't allow irrigation during the day. We meet all those kind of criteria for efficient use of water. So with the new legislation, we suddenly have moved the goalposts. Now we're, instead of looking to manage our 22,500 acre-feet of water, we're looking to manage our 30,000 acre-feet of water. And that extra 8,000 acre-feet is treated the same way. It's got a little bit different ET factors, but it's treated the same way. You're limiting the use of it. And now we're we don't have that in our portfolio to go to the communities and say, hey, we want to change this to somebody else. Now, the other part of this that's important in our minds is that we're in agreement with indoor water use efficiency and the state looking at those, setting those standards. We're in agreement with setting standards for outdoor water use efficiency. Both those give us an opportunity to look at system efficiency. And when I say system, I mean from Colorado River, the State Water Project, all the way down into Santa Margarita Water District. By us being able to recycle water and convert from domestic permanently to recycled, it's an opportunity for everybody in the water business to look at that system efficiency. That's 1,000, 1,200 acre feet of water that maybe doesn't have to pump over the Tehachapi's. It can help a community in the Central Valley that doesn't have good drinking water now. And that's where the regulations fall short, we think, in that we lose some of that incentive to be able to develop these other sources and take this on and look at it differently than we have in the past. So I'll sum it up there. We do think it's important for everybody in the room to look at reliability. We look at this as a portfolio approach. You ought to have as many different sources of water. All the projects that have been talked about, the tunnels, Sites Reservoir, they're years away. We could have the next disaster. The next drought could be starting today, even though it doesn't look like it. We might have another couple of weeks before the next drought starts. But we ought to be planning for that. And there's nothing wrong with a water agency having 125%, 150% supply available to it at all times, drought or not drought. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Excellent. So, Max, this first question is for you. I'm hearing that conservation is starting to make a difference on the amount of wastewater that gets pumped downstream that ultimately would be recycled by smaller communities farther down the line. Is there anything in this new proposal, the new plan that you talked about, that gives people credit for investing in their water recycling plans?
So again, the key distinction in the legislation is what level of treatment and what use of the recycled water. The legislation gives the credit for the highly advanced treated recycled water that is put back in a groundwater basin or in a surface water reservoir. It does not give the credit for the lower level of treatment irrigation systems, the so-called purple pipe systems. Here's a couple points I want to make about this. One is, irrespective of any state legislation or regulation, when you look at the trend lines for indoor water use, they're going down. That's as housing stock gets updated, it's as appliances become more efficient, it's as people change their habits and get on their teenagers about taking the 20-minute shower. So that is happening irrespective of anything happening in the regulatory sphere. The indoor water use is on a downward trend. It's about 1% per year. When you look statewide, that is going to impact wastewater flows. It does, however, present an opportunity in terms of more concentrated flows when you think about the ability of wastewater plants to do energy production, but we can leave that aside for this discussion. So on the issue of the purple pipe, that was a policy decision. There were a number of factors that went into it, but ultimately the legislature landed in saying, we don't think that the purple pipe systems merit the same type of credit. It's not water that is directly augmenting water supply. It might be indirectly augmenting water supply, but it's very different by its nature, and it didn't make the cut.
All right, thank you so much. Paul and Dan, this is a question for either or both of you, and it's kind of a hypothetical. Would you ever consider letting customers continue to use water over their allotment and take the fine because it would be less expensive than what they would lose in losing the rate, the additional money that they would pay as a monthly rate?
Yeah, that's a fun question. and very hypothetical, but maybe not so much. But no, of course, we're all part of the community. That's what this conference and the whole water industry is about. But it does go to the cost of conservation. There is, the only reason you do something like that is because of the cost of conservation. During the recent drought, the level that the fines would have been, we lost probably double that in lost revenue and spent probably 50% of that in additional outreach. So yeah, we have proactively done basically what it takes to be part of the community and get it done. So I don't think we would consider that, but it's a kind of an interesting hypothetical.
I agree with Paul on that we would not go out and deliberately use more water than the allocation. The system, even our rate structures are designed that you convince people through increasing prices that it may not be in their best interest to do the same. And so it does go to that fundamental question, though, of what are we trying to accomplish when we look at water use efficiency? And we have to be careful to not create heat sinks with people just pulling out grass and putting in hardscape. We want them to have some landscaping. We want some of those things in there. So it is a balance, and that's where that outreach comes into play, and making sure people understand if you have kids who are playing, grass is great. If no one ever walks on it, you may want to consider some other kind of plant structure.
Good point. So Orange County is really proud of their 10-year reaction to the drought and their ability to conserve. For Orange County specifically, has conservation been the golden ticket that will continue to be the solution going into the future, or are there other things they have to address down here over and above conservation that are going to be a bulwark against whatever happens in the future? Any of you can answer this question.
I'd say that conservation is important, but I'd venture to say most people in this room's investment strategy does not put everything in one bucket. They've got their money split a bunch of different things. That's the same approach that I think the water industry has to take. We use conservation, but we also have to look at reliability of our supplies, what happens in an emergency, what happens in a drought, where are you going to get that next drop of water? Because we have an obligation to meet health and safety requirements. So we got to have some minimums always. You got to be able to put out fires. You got to be able to serve indoor use. And having that reliability is going to be important. So that portfolio approach and having more supplies available than your demand is going to be a smart way to go.
Thank you so much. Let's we have just time for one question from the audience. Wow, this is a good topic. Right here, sir. Well, because you're going to pull a muscle, you raise your arm so high. There, wait for the microphone.
It's for Max.
Hey, Max, I don't get it. I don't get this recycled water. You're saying here. Okay.
Now he'll raise the level for you. Maybe he's anticipating your question. If you say it, I'll repeat it. Go ahead.
I don't
There
get
we go.
it. Max, I don't get it. If I do recycled water and that takes the burden off imported water somewhere else, I don't get any credit for that. But if I spend another $500 on that recycled water and make it advanced tertiary, I get a credit. And I can use it for however I want. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm not trying to discourage, Orange County Water District from expanding the GWR, or anyone else doing that, but I don't understand why, the South County in particular is, losing the benefit of recycled water in the purple pipe system. You didn't do the legislation, but I don't get it.
So I guess the only thing I can say in response to that is, the legislation is never done. There's always opportunity to continue the discussion on this, and I know that the representatives from water reuse are here today. So I would welcome the conversation. We are where we are vis-a-vis the rules right now. I don't have a great answer for you other than to say, again, sometimes these things are just policy decisions that get made as part of the so-called sausage-making process.
Excellent. Each talk was very excellent. Give them a round of applause, folks.
Fritz.
Nope. Don't have
Fritz.
time. Don't have time.
Yes, we have 2 more questions. So we have one here in the back
do
and
we
one
have
in the
time?
front, and that's all that we have time for. So we'll go ahead and ask 2 more questions.
I was trying to be strict at time because we have the Feinberg wedding in here at 3:30. Okay, so where's the other question? Right there, okay.
Hi, this question is for Max. And what I'm interested in is, does the state have a model that calculates temperature differential as evapotranspiration rates decrease, and what impact that will have on energy costs for cooling?
So the state collects a lot of data on evapotranspiration. Some of you are aware the state maintains a system of sensors, the CIMIS system, that are sensors around the state that collect temperature data. But in addition to those sensors, there are more sophisticated sensor technologies that are being developed now that don't require those type of weather stations. And so we're going to look at all of that, because the whole purpose of this legislation and these standards is to really look specifically at each supplier's service area and see what those different levels of evapotranspiration are. And particularly for many of you in this room and others in Southern California, you have different evapotranspiration zones within your service area. And so we have to account for that when we build out the model. So that data collection is intensive, but we're doing it, and that will become part of the standard.
Thank you. One more question. Yeah, hang on.
Hi. I'm with Water Reuse, so I just wanted to thank you for the discussion about this, the legislation, both from the purple pipe and the potable reuse perspective. And just on a clarifying perspective from the purple pipe perspective, it was touched on, but the ETO factor for outdoor irrigation use, which is specifically cited in the legislation that you will consider it, which is currently a 1.0 use for recycled water special landscape. And then I think it's quite a bit lower for potable for 0.55. So I'm not saying that's the same as an overarching credit, but there is that incentive if people do want to point to that. Now, they're working on the regulations now, and so people should be involved with the water board on this.
All right, we're out of time. If you'd like to assault each of these men individually, you can do it during the lunch period. We're going to take a brief break so the wonderful staff here at Disneyland Resort can set up the room for lunch. We'll summon you back in the room. Please enjoy your break. Thanks, gents, for a great discussion.